woman wakes up every morning and meets herself in the mirror, and she has no idea that the person looking back is a fiction. Not a lie she tells others. A lie so deep she tells it to herself, so foundational she cannot see where the lie ends and she begins. She believes she knows who she is. She has a name, a history, a set of preferences and opinions and reactions she calls her personality. She speaks about herself with confidence. I am this kind of person. I would never do that. This is just how I am. And every word is a brick in a prison she has been building since childhood, a structure so complete she has mistaken it for the sky. There is a voice that narrates existence from the inside, and that voice is lying. Not occasionally, not about small things, constantly, about everything. It lies about what happened yesterday, editing the memory to preserve a version of self that can be tolerated. It lies about why things were done, inventing noble motivations for actions that were driven by fear or hunger or wounds too shameful to acknowledge. It lies about what is wanted, burying true desires under layers of what should be wanted, what is acceptable to want. What wanting would not threaten the carefully constructed identity. The voice sounds like self, like the most intimate truth, like the one thing that can be trusted in a world of uncertainty. And it is the most elaborate deception a human being will ever encounter. Consider the man who believes he is generous. He gives freely, helps without being asked, shows up when others need him. This is his identity, the generous one, the reliable one, the one who sacrifices, and beneath the generosity, invisible to him, lives a terror of being worthless unless he's useful. The giving is not generosity. It is a transaction. I give so that I will be needed, so that I will have a place, so that the unbearable possibility of being unnecessary will be kept at bay. He does not see this. He cannot see this, because seeing it would collapse the self he has constructed, and the mind protects its constructions with everything it has. Jung called this the ego, not in the colloquial sense of arrogance, but as the center of consciousness, the I that believes itself to be the whole, when it is only a small clearing in a vast forest. The ego is not the self. It is a story about the self, a narrative that organizes experience into something coherent enough to function. The story is necessary. Without it, there would be no continuity, no sense of moving through time as a single being, no foundation for action or choice. But the story is not true. It is a construction, and the construction requires constant maintenance, constant editing, constant suppression of everything that does not fit the narrative. The lies are not malicious, they are protective. The mind learned early that certain truths are too dangerous to hold consciously. The child who was unloved could not survive the full weight of that knowledge, so the mind created a story. Perhaps I am unlovable because I am flawed, and if I fix the flaw, love will come. The story is false. The story causes decades of suffering, but the story is preferable to the alternative, which is the annihilating truth that love was withheld for no reason the child could control. The lie is a survival mechanism. The problem is that survival mechanisms do not update themselves. They continue running long after the danger has passed, protecting against threats that no longer exist, distorting perception to serve a self that no longer needs such desperate protection. Every strong emotional reaction is a signal that the lie is being threatened. The anger that flares when someone offers criticism, the shame that floods when a mistake is made, the defensive explanation that springs to the lips before the accusation is even finished. These are not responses to the present moment. They are the ego fighting for its life, deploying whatever weapons it has to protect the narrative from collapse. The intensity of the reaction reveals the fragility of the construction. The things that trigger the strongest responses are the things that come closest to the truth the mind is hiding. This is why self-knowledge is so difficult and so rare. The self that wants to know is the same self that is constructed from not knowing. The ego cannot investigate the ego without threatening its own existence. It is like asking a government to honestly investigate its own corruption. The investigator and the investigated are the same entity, with the same interest in certain things remaining hidden. The mind will generate endless distractions, endless rationalizations, endless clever analyses that somehow always circle back to confirming what it already believed. True insight arrives not through thinking harder, but through something closer to surrender, a moment when the defenses relax, when the narrative loosens its grip, when something true slips through before the censor can catch it. Jung spent his life mapping the territories the ego hides from itself. The shadow, everything rejected, denied, pushed into darkness because it did not fit the acceptable image. The anima and animus, the contrasexual elements that the ego cannot integrate and therefore projects onto others. The complexes, the autonomous clusters of energy that hijack consciousness and act through a person without their knowledge or consent. These are not abstractions. They are living presences in the psyche, influencing every perception, every choice, every relationship. And they remain invisible precisely because the ego's primary function is to keep them invisible. The path out is not more thinking. It is not better arguments or stronger willpower or another framework for understanding. The path out is through the body, through dreams, through the symptoms that the mind produces when the lies become too heavy to maintain. The depression that settles without cause. The anxiety that hums beneath every achievement. The relationships that keep failing in the same ways. These are not problems to be solved. They are messages from the parts of the psyche that the ego has exiled, demanding to be heard. The woman in the mirror will never see herself clearly through the mirror. The reflection shows only what the ego allows to be shown. True seeing requires turning around, looking away from the image, descending into the darkness where the exiled parts wait. It requires courage that most people will never find, because the ego will generate every conceivable reason not to look. Too busy, too painful, too self-indulgent, too dangerous. The excuses are infinite. They are the final lie, the lie that says the lying is not happening, the lie that protects all the other lies by making the investigation seem unnecessary. But sometimes the lies collapse on their own. The crisis comes, the loss, the failure, the breakdown that the ego cannot explain away. The narrative that held for decades suddenly stops working. The self that was so solid reveals itself as construction, as story, as desperate fiction maintained against the void. These moments are terrifying. They feel like death. In a sense, they are death, the death of who someone believed themselves to be. And in that death, something else becomes possible. Not a new lie to replace the old one, but something closer to truth. Something that can hold the complexity without collapsing. Something that does not need to lie to survive.